Welcome to the Book Podcast, where we discuss books about the book, the Bible, with your hosts, Scott Moffat and Gabriel Penfield.
We go as deep as we can go, look as hard as we can look, but we only scratch the surface of the meaning of the book. We only scratch the surface of the meaning of the book.
Today, we're going to share in a different kind of podcast than our normal. This episode will not include the author since he is no longer with us. The book we examine this hour was written by a ghostwriter who unfortunately declined our invitation to appear. This book is a familiar story to many of us who have seen films or read books about the Holocaust and in particular, Oskar Schindler. The events in this book took place obviously during the Holocaust, and it involves a young boy in his early teens. If you're unaware of what the term Holocaust means, it comes from the ancient Greek and it refers to a burnt offering. This seems to be a very apropos title when applied to the events that took place in Nazi concentration camps across Europe. As stated, many books about the Holocaust have been written by those who experienced it. If you go to Amazon, it has a list of over 75 books written by those who remember their experience in a concentration camp. You'll probably recall some of the names which are familiar to most of us, such as The Hiding Place, Night, Schindler's List, and of course, the Diary of Anne Frank. Recently, The Book Thief was popular, as well as The Boy in the Striped Pajamas. And there are many others. Well, we're glad that you're here with us today. I'm Scott Moffat, the host of the Book Podcast. And the book we examined this morning is similar to those others, but it was written by a man who not only survived the Nazi camp system, but went on to thrive in his life, lived here in America. His anglicized name is Leon Leyson. Leon was saved from certain death by Oskar Schindler of Schindler's List fame. I was made aware of the book by the Friends of Israel bookstore promotional flyer when it was recommended for young readers, so I thought I'd pass it along to our listening audience. Young people should be familiar and interested in human history. And so this tale from Eastern Europe that is now descending into a historical perspective shows us the madness that descended upon the country of Germany and engulfed the whole European continent and the world. So the book begins with Leon describing his life growing up in Poland. His family would eventually move to Krakow, where his father receives a job promotion. Leon was born as Leib Lejean, and he lived a normal, happy childhood in pre-World War Poland. He chronicles his life experiences during peacetime and the unexpected run-up to World War II. He and most other Jews refused to see this descent into the Nazi obsession with mass murder of the Jews. They continued to live simple lives. Leon lived in a rural area, and he was used to having his life dependent upon God, nature, and his family. But all of that would change when the monsters from Germany showed up at his doorstep. Like every other Jew under the thumb of the Hitler Third Reich, Leon faced the prospect of death at any moment. As we begin, I'd like to thank Antheum Books for sending a review copy to me. Thank you, editors. Leon was from Naraki, Poland, which was just a short rock's throw from the former Soviet Union. This little town of Naraki was an idyllic setting for a Jewish family to live in peace and prosperity. The rural countryside where his family shared traditional Polish food, lived off the land, and kept Jewish traditions. Leon, writing this book 70 years after his ordeal as a concentration camp survivor, highlights his will to live, the power of family relationships, and how small acts of kindness mean the most in the darkest of hours. After the army invaded Poland in 1938, a cycle of misery, starvation, and death was set into motion. This would last him for 6 long years. I'd like to share with you a short introduction to Leon's book in the following clip. The writing is simple, but it gives a clear picture of what life was like in the Holocaust. It's impossible for us to truly understand what these people experienced, undergoing beatings, starvation, and the constant torment and hate of those around them, not only in Poland, but from the Jewish people, but from the Nazis themselves. Physical pain just became part of their suffering. And even more hurtful than the starvation and the pain of constant work that they endured was the loss of their entire extended families. How would it be for you to learn that all the people that you loved had been killed and sent to a cruel ending in a gas chamber? What would it be like to live knowing you were never going to see any of your loved ones again? Is it even possible to go on living after suffering such a crushing blow? Somehow Leon did survive these hellish circumstances with the help of a man who, by all appearances, looked like an enemy, Oskar Schindler. Who is this man? He was a German businessman who would risk his life and fortune to rescue Jews from certain death. Now, that's not how it started, but that's how it became as Oskar watched the persecution of the Jewish people in the concentration camps he visited. His excuse at the beginning was that he needed them to work in his factory. And as you have guessed, Leon's story is linked critically with the acclaimed movie Schindler's List. Steven Spielberg shows in the movie just how amazing Schindler was, not only as a man, but as a compassionate individual. The question is, was he disguising himself as a Nazi to help the Jews? Or had he been radically changed by the war and his interaction with the Jews as they suffered? Schindler would employ bribes, drunken parties, and women to coerce high-ranking Nazis who ruled the camps into letting his Jews be saved. Leon was one of Schindler's workers, and he worked at a lathe machine standing on a wooden box because he was just a kid. He was just a teenager, and a short one at that. He describes Schindler as a hero disguised as a monster himself, who saved my life. Here is Leon's testimony of what the camp was like in the following short clip.
In the Plaszow concentration camp was just like, when I got there, when I stepped inside the gate, it was like coming to the end of the world. People were yelling, dogs are barking, barbed wire all around, barracks as far as the eye could see. I looked out there and I thought to myself, from there, I wasn't going to go anywhere. This is going to be my last stop. There was just no way out. In this concentration camp, if you saw the movie, you saw Armageddon, doing, murdering people from the balcony, and this was just an example. Everyone, all these officers who operated this camp did exactly the same thing. They all were made of the same stripe. It's just that in the movie, you can't show you atrocity after atrocity after atrocity. You get your eyes kind of start glazing over after a while. But they were all doing that on a daily basis. There was another time, another one of these officers was walking through the factory where we were working, and I happened to be doing something that I was putting together two pieces of part of a brush, and it had to be nailed together with brads, and they're little things, and it's hard to drive through hardwood. Anyway, so I was working on that, and this came over there, and she stood next to me, like almost pressing against me, and he said, "If it goes crooked, I'm going to shoot you in the head." At the time, it didn't register with me. I really didn't realize what he had said, and I kept doing it. I kept nailing those things together. He left, and then after the shift was over, and I went back to my barracks and thought about what had happened, that's when I got the shakes. It's just, that's kind of life it was. And so Schindler's people who worked in Schindler's company had to be escorted from the camp now to his factory. And so he was able to persuade the authorities with a bit of bribes to let him build a sub-camp next to the factory so his employees could just, instead of being escorted every day back and forth, they could just get out of the barracks, go to work, and go back to the barracks again without guards, because it was right adjacent to the factory. And he was able to accomplish that, as you know, and my father and my brother went to live there. And then once the camp was built, Schindler was hiring more people. Now he had a camp, he had more barracks there, and he had room, and so there was a list of people made up of about 30, kind of mini Schindler's list of those people who were going to be transferred from the concentration camp Plaszow to Schindler's company, which was considerably better to be in Schindler's company than it was in Plaszow. And so my mother and I were on the list. My father asked Schindler to add my mother and me to the list. And I was on the list, and my mother was on the list, and we were going to be transferred. And a few days before we were going to be transferred, with my good luck or bad luck, I discovered that my name was crossed off the list and that I was not going to go. And I tried to find out why they did that, or who did it, or what was the reason for it. But nobody paid much attention to me. I was a little kid. They just kind of pushed me off and said, "Never mind, you go back to the brush factory, that's it." And so on the day that they were going to leave, I snuck away from my job in the brush factory and went to see my mother off. I was going to be left alone in this concentration camp. If that had happened, my chances for surviving alone in that camp would have been almost zero. And so I went to see my mother off, and I got closer and closer, and eventually I found myself in front of this Nazi officer who was in charge of escorting the group to Schindler's company. Big guy, monstrous looking, scary. I went up to him, told him my name, and I told him my name was on the list, and somebody crossed my name off. And then I proceeded to tell him about my family. I was talking to a guy who doesn't even think I'm human. I was telling him about my mother is on the list, and she's in this group. Then I said, my father and my brother are there already. Even then I thought that was a pretty stupid thing to say to a guy like this. But something happened I can't explain. he looked at the list, he looked at me, and he just grunted, like that. Pointed to the group. I jumped in, tried to make myself smaller than I really was. And it seemed like I was there for a long time waiting for the gate to open, but it probably wasn't very long. The group started to move, and I was able to breathe, I ended up working 12-hour shifts in Schindler's company. Night shift, mostly. But I was too short, so, I was little, and I was not comfortable with seeing over the machine and reach the controls better. I used to stand on a box about 8 inches upside down, and I would work there. And Schindler had a habit of course, he entertained a lot. He entertained officials all the time in his office, upstairs from the factory. And once the party was over and the guests left, Schindler would come down all by himself, down to factory floor, and walk through slowly and stop and talk to people. And this is where you could see the difference between a Nazi and a person who did not accept the Nazi ideology. You can imagine he stopped and talked to me and asked me, he'd say good evening, wait for an answer, in complete sentences. He asked me how many pieces I've made, which is probably something he wasn't really interested in knowing, but he just wanted to make a little contact with this kid standing on a box there working this night shift. And sometimes after these visits, when I went to get my ration of food the next day, I would discover that Schindler left word that I should receive 2 rations. It's pretty good. You got to remember. You got to think about this a little bit. A man who partied all night and had all these guests and came down and I guess he didn't have a hangover. He found the person who was handing out the rations of food to tell him to give me 2 rations. That is, it's pretty good. When you judge Oskar Schindler and his activities during that period, you have to judge him within the context of the times then, not within today's times. If he were doing this within today, he would be a pretty good manager, a pretty good CEO, taking care of his employees, and talking to them, visiting them, making sure they knew who he was and he knew who they were. It was just one of those things that you do if you're a good manager. But in those days, the law of the land was to murder Jews. To treat Jews as human beings was against the law and punishable by concentration camp or worse. And so what he was doing was very dangerous to his own well-being. But he did it anyway. And there was no ulterior motive there except that he was a decent human being who was doing the right thing.
We can't retell all that happened to Leon in the war and in the concentration camps, which he found himself. You'll need to read that in the book for yourself. It's not a long read. It's a little over 100 pages, but it tells the story with depth and emotion, and you will feel like you are going through these experiences yourself. He reminds us that it's possible for human beings to outlast even the worst of all experiences in this world, and then to rebuild your life, as he eventually ends up in the United States and becomes a teacher in a high school in California. Leon experiences the Krakow ghetto, 2 brutal concentration camps, and yet somehow he survives to tell us about it. Now, I've read many historical records of World War II, many books on the Holocaust. I've seen many of the movies that have been produced in the last 75, 80 years that tell us the toll of human suffering and of a world gone mad. Leon's work made me stop and think about how treasured our families really are, and how blessed we are to know the comfort of a warm bed, plentiful food, and the love of our community. These are things that we should really not take for granted, but stop and think about them and truly appreciate them in the life of his life experience, expressed by his deep devotion to God and family. It will certainly put our lives into a proper perspective. It's easy to take our comforts for granted here in America. But when we walk through the life that Leon lived, we see how important those things should really be to us. Even though the story is very sad and it's touching to read, ultimately it uplifts the human spirit and teaches us that in the worst of times, we can still find goodness and bravery in this world, even in those who we might look at first and they might appear to be monsters to us. The question is, can one man make a difference in this world? Can you make a difference in your world? Here's Leon's answer in a short clip from Fullerton College in 2012.
Yes,
You think one man can make a difference?
one man can definitely make a difference.
And how?
There is a saying in the old scriptures, tradition, it says, "He who saves one life saves the world entirely." And when you think about it, it makes sense. In Schindler's case, he saved 1,200 people, but in real life, he saved a lot more than that. All the generations that come after are all going to be here because of what Schindler, one man, did. Quite remarkable.
And a question that I have as well is, you know how like some people say that, oh, this isn't true, the Holocaust didn't happen, and even though there's so much evidence and so many testimonies from people like yourself who survived, how does that make you feel?
Oh, yeah, I really don't think about it too much. There are two kinds of people who deny the Holocaust. Those who are ignorant and those who know better, but write books and make money from it. So, that's it. Other than that, what can you say? Bertolt Brecht, a playwright, escaped Germany when the Nazis came to power. He came to this country. One of the things he said was that he who doesn't know the truth is simply an ignorant person. But he who does know the truth and denies it is a criminal. And I think that is the case in those people who deny the Holocaust. They're either ignorant or they're a criminal because they know better.
Now, in my life, I had the experience of meeting, I'd say 10 to 15 Holocaust survivors. In our first church, when Sue and I became believers, the custodians of our church were actually from the Netherlands, and they had survived a concentration camp. They had the stamps on their arm, and he and his wife made their way over to the United States, and he told us many stories about the sufferings that they experienced in those camps, which I'm not at liberty to discuss, but it's painful to remember what the human being is capable of doing. But thank God we have these testimonies that share with us how God overcomes, how people through family, through loved ones, and through the bravery of one can overcome even the most evil of situations. Well, I trust you'll pick up a copy of Leon Leyson's book, The Boy on the Wooden Box. There it is. Please subscribe, like, and hit the notification bell to support our channel. And I'd like to thank you very much for watching this short clip and review of The Boy in the Wooden Box. Our next episode of the book will be out in about 2 weeks. So God bless you. Thank you again. And may the Lord give you a great 2025.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Book Podcast. If you liked what you heard and want to support us, like, follow, subscribe on any podcasting platform, on YouTube, on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. Simply type in @hearthebookpod, @hearthebookpod. Thank you. See you next time.